I'm an idiot. You shouldn't listen to any of my opinions. I know nothing about the Eurovision Song Contest.
In the lead up to Eurovision over the last few months, I made a lot of predictions. Some of them were correct, some of them were incorrect but plausible, and some of them were completely and utterly ridiculous. Today, we're going through my worst takes of Eurovision 2025 and seeing just how badly they've aged. In most cases, they're in about as good a state as milk in a single man's fridge. In any case, I'm going to issue each one of them a stink rating from 1 to 10 based on just how ridiculous the prediction in question is. At the end, we will crown one as my stinkiest take of 2025. As always, make sure to like the video, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you enjoy it, and you can check my socials and find details of how to support me financially in the description below. Now, before we start, there is one thing I'm going to talk about that I got right this season. That was taking Surfshark VPN with me all around Europe, and keeping access to the same shows that I watch at home in the UK as a result. Surfshark has over 3,200 servers in over 100 countries, and they're high speed so you don't have to deal with buffering either. If you're in the US, for example, you can use Surfshark to bypass the block on Eurovision performances in that country and watch the full shows on YouTube rather than being forced onto Peacock instead. Surfshark VPN saved Eurovision fans money at the contest this year too. With Basel sitting so close to the French border, jumping onto Surfshark and setting your location to France got you a better deal on French train tickets. Surfshark will also notify you if you're the victim of a data breach and keep your web traffic anonymous. They can also help remove your data from dodgy brokers who are buying it and selling it to the highest bidder. I use this service myself and I've been removed from more than 200 dodgy brokers lists now. The peace and quiet in my spam inbox, as I've said before, utter bliss. Go to surfshark.com/ESCGabe or use code ESCGabe at checkout to get 4 extra months of Surfshark. That's surfshark.com/ESCGabe or use code ESCGabe at checkout. Now, it's time for the first terrible shout of the video, and I'm getting one out of the way that has been repeatedly stressed to me. That was Lithuania being in with a chance of winning the entire contest. I originally made this prediction about 3 o'clock in the morning when I was A, really overexcited because the national selection had just happened, and B, more than a little tipsy following Estilal in Estonia at the same night, which I attended. If it had just been that, maybe I would have gotten away with it. But I then repeated it on a podcast the following day, and then it made it onto Lithuanian news.
Dariau interviu, pokalbį, podcastą su vienu populiariausiu pasaulyje Eurovizijos YouTuberiu, ESCGabe. Tai labai kviesiu visus žiūrovus vakare įsijungti tą podcastą. Taip, kol kas jis dar montuojamas, 2/3 sumontuota, bet Geibas mane visiškai nustebino. Jis pasakė, kad aš matau labai mažą galimybę, kaip Lietuva net galėtų laimėti Euroviziją. Aš sakau, o tai kaip čia taip, niekas tokių lūkesčių ne.
That meant I was locked in here. There was absolutely no going back on this. I was going to live or die by how this panned out. I also lost money on this one because in that moment, I put a bet on that I was so obviously always going to lose. In the end, rather than getting a best ever result for Lithuania and ending up in the top 3, Katarsis ended up in 16th instead.
Easy top 3. If I'm not 16th!
I'm going to try and analyse why in each case the prediction either did or didn't come true. It's more interesting in some cases than others, but in this one, it's pretty straightforward. This was very clearly never on the table ever. Like, 0% chance. I was completely deluded. That's not to criticize the performance or the song because my feelings on that remain pretty much unchanged. I still think this is stunning. I think the staging is perfect and every element blends perfectly. We unfortunately have to fall to a slightly more basic explanation. That's that this genre of music is just not that popular. It's maybe a little too niche to win the contest and maybe a little too depressing as well. What I will never understand though is all of the ridiculous predictions saying that this wouldn't even qualify. Between the Lithuanian diaspora and the admittedly small in number but very committed fans of this kind of music, this was always going to sail through with ease. Overall, this one was pretty bad. So we're going to start this video with a high score on the stinkometer. I'm awarding this a 9 out of 10. Next is one that I repeated often and loudly. That's that Finland had a chance of winning the contest, and that chance was as high as 25%. I went really hard on this right from the outset. I made an entire video in January declaring that Erika Vikman could win Eurovision, initially to a very mixed response. And then I watched as more and more people came around to my point of view. I then declared on the day of the contest that this had a 25% chance of winning, and that meant it had a higher chance than anybody else. At the same time, I outlined a worst case scenario where she finished in the oh so low place of the bottom end of the top 10. In the end, she finished 11th. I have repeatedly been salty in various places about this result, so I'm not going to do it again now. Instead, I'm going to take a breath and try to start to understand slightly more why this happened. This may shock you to find out, given how level-headed and calm I am, but I think I may have gotten a little overexcited and been carried away in my delusion as a result. I know it's really unexpected coming from me. There are a few reasons why we ended off worse here than I initially thought. First is the impact of the muted crowd. The whole staging concept of this was that it was Erica's concert, that she's a rock star and that she's holding the entire room in the palm of her hand. That's a lot more difficult to get across if you can't hear the audience at all. They were literally chanting her name at the end of the song, and they were singing Ishkoma all through every chorus. For us watching on the television, you couldn't hear it at all. You instantly would massively increase this song's potential impact if you put it on the Eurovision 2024 stage with Eurovision 2024's sound mixing. The second factor, and arguably the most important one as well, is that I and many others simply overestimated this song's appeal outside of Eurovision fan bubbles. Given the quality of the staging and the fact that Erica did basically everything she could have done, we can confidently say that this song was being elevated to the maximum possible extent by the way she was performing it. The craze around this that fans of this like me were hoping for among non-Eurovision fans, or as I like to call them, normal people, simply didn't materialise. That's what stood ultimately between a solid mid-table and a challenge at the top of the scoreboard. Erica scored 88 points from the jury, and while that might not seem much, it meant that had she scored 270 from the public, which didn't seem impossible in advance of the show, she would have finished second. Sometimes things just don't connect in the way that we hoped. Overall, I don't think that Finland winning was a particularly hot take this year. A lot of people felt the same, especially during the Eurovision week itself. However, because I went so hard on it for so long, I have to elevate the stinkiness a little bit. I'm giving this one a 6 out of 10. Next up is the first of a few of the predictions that I made in the Things That Won't Happen at Eurovision 2025 video. Some parts of that video have actually aged really quite well. None more so than my prediction that we wouldn't see Måns Zelmerlöw at the contest this year. That was before any of the Melfest songs were released as well. Unfortunately, one thing didn't age well. That was my prediction that there wouldn't be another jury-led winner at the competition this year. This one essentially comes down to me being really naive. I was convinced that amid the much calmer atmosphere this year, we wouldn't see the same sort of really high televote for Israel that we saw in 2024. As a result, the actual power of the televote would be a lot closer to the 50% that it represents. That's because without these huge political pressures on the voting, there's more points to play for everyone else. Despite the fact Israel did do very slightly worse with the televote this year, overall this was a big misjudgment because they still delivered 297 points from the public. Whether those points are entirely legitimate is a different matter, but I've covered that at length already. That said, even if Israel wasn't in the competition at all, it wouldn't have changed the winner, and it wouldn't have changed the route they used to get to that point. This is because once you remove Israel and reassign their points, Austria still wins by a comfortable margin. It's not that anyone ran away with the jury vote this year, and I was right to an extent in that they didn't predetermine the outcome. In theory, a lot of countries still could have won after the jury points had been cast. The problem is that the televote was all over the place as well. Nobody scored more than 300 points with the televote compared to 3 countries last year, and even if you remove that Israeli distortion that I talked about, you still only have 2 countries scoring more than 200 from the public. Overall, we should be clear here that it was still a lot less lopsided than previous years, and as a result, I don't think this is going to leave a bad taste in the mouth for some people that those previous ones did. In general, Austria was one of the few things that the public and jury kind of agreed on because they both scored JJ quite highly. It doesn't change the fact that this prediction was still very much wrong. It's not a particular stinker as such, so I'm only going to put it on a 3 out of 10 for now. The next big miss is Ireland. I suggested both in my semi-final 2 qualifiers video and in my original vlog that I made at Irish Eurosong, the national final this year, that it was more likely than not that we would see Emmy in the final of the show. This, in the end, was not particularly close to happening. Full disclosure here though, I enjoyed enjoyed this a lot on the night, and that wasn't just because I was with Oge Ireland watching that semi-final live. I'm sure that elevated it somewhat. And don't get me wrong, I still don't think it was a performance that really lived up to my hopes, and I'll talk about in a minute why, but it was still fun, no matter how many times I am ratioed on Twitter for saying so. Unfortunately though, I think by the time we got to that semi-final night, the writing was already on the wall that this was staying firmly in the semi-finals. Firstly, the tacky visuals that had been there ever since the national selection had remained right through to the final performance, and I had previously stressed that I thought it was really important that they got rid of them. Secondly, we have to look at how this was staged, because it just didn't work. Emmy is totally static for the duration of this performance. She barely moves at all, and for the entire time, she is stood atop her little rocket ship. She doesn't interact as a result with the keyboardist or the dancers whatsoever. It's like the performance is happening around her and she's minimized to a sideshow. What's frustrating here is that stand-in rehearsal footage has now emerged that showed Emmy stand-in moving around the stage more, interacting with her dancers, and generally showing something a lot more convincing. For whatever reason, this was changed and it didn't look like that in the final product. What was especially strange about this is that a large part of the marketing for this song had revolved around creating a TikTok dance and attempting to make it go viral. It's very strange to do that and then create a stage show which completely removes any opportunity to call back to it. Vocally, I thought Emmy did a solid job, but the step up I've been hoping for from Eurosong just didn't really materialize on the Eurovision stage. This is going to remain one of my guilty pleasures from the contest this year, and I personally would have loved seeing it in the final as a result, but I understand why we ended up exactly where we did. Overall, I'd class this as a medium miss. I've definitely done worse, but it wasn't exactly a good call either. Let's call it a 5 out of 10 on the stinky takeometer and move on. The next one I think is a fairly conventional wisdom take that most people were subscribing to, but like most people, I was wrong about it. That was that Sweden could not be beaten in the public vote. This is another hard one to explain, and another one where I'm going to bring in the lack of crowd noise as a potential explanation. It took a lot away from the performance, and it denied us an audience full of people screaming sauna. There's no point laboring this point because we've already made it in this video and previously, so I'm going to focus on some other things for this section. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people, when they saw it on the stage in Basel, for whatever reason, felt like some of the Melody Festival and magic had been lost by the time we got to the actual show. It just wasn't quite hitting the same as it did then. Whether that was fatigue on our part, having been used to it for a couple of months, or a genuine change for the worse in how it was performed is up for debate, but it just wasn't quite as good as it was before. In addition to that, I think it's important to recognise that Kai were an underdog at Melfest. That is a totally different framing for the performance from the runaway favourites that they were considered coming into the shows this year. Part of the charm was probably because they were the plucky underdog taking on the polished heir apparent to the Swedish bland pop throne, Måns Zelmerlöw. In any case, I still felt like it had enough to win, and I do think there is maybe a learned element to this as well. We are very used to Sweden being totally dominant, coming to the contest as favourites and then steamrolling everyone. And obviously, the result this year doesn't change the fact that they are very clearly the best at Eurovision out of anybody. The thing is though, that can lead to lazy assumptions about how well they're going to do with the juries, and an assumption that the public will deliver in the way that we predict. Here's the thing, the public is unpredictable, and they really preferred the silly coffee man. This was a cultural phenomenon in the Nordic countries, and that did show in the results. But the cultural relevance of this was very much contained to those countries in a way that maybe we didn't expect. Over 33% of the points that Sweden received came from Norway, Finland, Denmark, Iceland, and Estonia. That's only 5 out of 38 participating countries. Outside of those, this clearly wasn't connecting as much, and we didn't see a single 10 or 12 from the public in any other country. Looking at it again with hindsight, it's easy to find reasons why this didn't win the show, but far too many people had this down as a guaranteed success in advance, and for that reason, it wasn't really a hot take to agree with that accepted wisdom. For that reason, it's only a 1 out of 10 on today's scale. The next one is notable for just how shocking it was, but also just how unequivocal I was in saying it was impossible. I was so certain that Switzerland would not do badly with the televote that I very specifically said, if they came last with the public, I would eat my hat. If Switzerland comes last with the public, I will eat my hat. There is no way Switzerland will come last with the public. That's one big criticism I would have.
0 points.
Well, guess where we are now? To be fair, this is another one that really caught people off guard. 0 points for this is one of the most extraordinary and also saddening results in modern Eurovision. Zoe May and the Swiss team put together a really stunning performance, with one of the most visually impressive stagings of the year, filmed in a single camera shot and with no real complex tricks. It was just Zoe and the camera. This suddenly emerged as a victory contender in Eurovision week as a result. And I wasn't the only one to float the idea that it could emerge as a surprise victor. At the very least, I thought it might win in the juries. That much proved to be accurate, given that Switzerland did score 214 points with the juries, putting them in second. After that, though, any hopes of a victory were brutally dashed. This is one of the most inexplicable things in the video. This was a beautiful song, staged and performed in a way that should have delivered results. Let's not forget that a minimalistic ballad has won the contest recently in the form of Amar Polish Deutsch by Salvador Sobral. The only factor that comes to mind here, and I mean the only one, is that people simply went, well, Switzerland just won the contest, so I'm going to vote for somebody else, in unusually high numbers. I'm not convinced by this explanation at all, but I literally have nothing else at the moment. I do not understand this result at all. Given that literally nobody saw this coming, it's going to be another 1 out of 10 for how stinky a take it was. But I'm going to have to take a moment to finish up some business with this hat before we move on. Oh god, my mouth's full of... Next up is one that came during the infamous roast of the Armenian national selection that myself and Jay did while we were in Estonia. In that stream, I said that I felt Armenia was essentially dead on arrival and had no chance of making it to the final. This was, of course, a happier time, before everybody started shouting Garg every time anything vaguely related to Armenia got mentioned literally anywhere. Seriously, guys, I think it's time to let the joke die. It has been months now. Anyway, this was a stupid prediction to make, given at this stage we already knew that Georgia, Israel, and France were all in Armenia's semi-final. These three countries were obviously going to give Armenia loads of points because of the diaspora and cultural connections, and that in turn would boot them into contention to qualify because they wouldn't have needed all that much elsewhere. That turned out to be the path that led to Armenia making it to the final over Australia. To Park's credit, he did do everything right on his end to give himself the best possible chance. His vocals were so much better than the national final, the staging was completely redone, which was exactly what this needed, and the whole performance was massively improved as a result. While it wasn't particularly controversial at the time after the national final to say that this wouldn't qualify, I do think that this has to score quite high on the stinkometer. That's just because I was so unequivocal at the time, but also partly because it was obviously an incorrect prediction based on the information that was already available to me when I made it. On that basis, it's going to get a 7 out of 10. We're coming towards the end now, but we have a seriously bad one before we finish. After the semi-finals this year, I said that Austria could not win Eurovision. I didn't feel that it could live up to the competition of France or Switzerland with the juries, and as a result, I felt that its only avenue to victory was closed. That was on the basis that I hadn't felt enough of an emotional connection in the semi-finals, and the vocals in the verses seemed to come across just a little nervy. JJ then proved me completely wrong by bringing out his best and least nervous performances, as well as his most emotional performance in the jury final on Friday night and then the live grand final on Saturday. This really spells out the danger of making a big call like this based mostly on vibes. If I looked again at the set of criteria laid out for the juries, I would have maybe had a moment to take a breath and say, yes, this clearly ticks all of these boxes. I didn't do that, and as a result, it ended up here. In any case, the odds and the general mood around this entry didn't shift after the semi-final, and it felt like I was the minority at the time by saying it didn't have a chance to win. In this case, that minority was absolutely not the place to be. I'm going to give this one an 8 out of 10 for stinkiness, because the final result really illustrates just how wrong I was. The next thing I got wrong was that there would be no Italians singing in the press center. This is another one from the Things That Won't Happen video. Incredibly, yes, they did it again. This is utterly surreal. 8 out of 10 stinkiness. The final thing I got wrong, well, sort of, was fan media will be in the press centre. This one was technically correct. Fan media was in the press centre. Unfortunately, I got rejected for accreditation, so I'm the one who ends up with egg on my face here. This is a 0 out of 10 for stinkiness because I was right, but it gets an honourable mention because it is a truly spectacular thing to make a prediction about, only to have the door slammed in your face. With that, we've come to the end of the video. Thank you as always for being here, and make sure to like and subscribe if you have enjoyed it. Thanks to all of your support, it's starting to look like this could well be a full-time endeavour for me for the 2026 season. If you want to help make that a reality, there is details on how to support me financially in the description. For now, thank you so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you again soon.